Hi everyone. This is our last day of Module 5, last day on circles, and today we're going to talk about equations of circles. And what I mean by that, for today, instead of a circle just being a circle, it's going to be in a coordinate plane, which means an xy plane, so we're going to be plotting points like 5, 3 or -7, 1, and we're going to write an equation for our circle. And it's actually really easy to do that as long as you know two things. You want to know the center of the circle and the radius for the circle. Now, if you know those two things, the equation for a circle is, you see it right here in blue, it's x minus h in parentheses squared plus y minus k in parentheses squared equals r squared. And we just need to know what each letter means. So let's start with the h and the k. The h and the k tell you the center of the circle. So the center comes from this number right here and this number right here. Now r is even easier to remember because r stands for radius. Now, what you may have noticed from that formula was it said x minus h and y minus k. Whenever a formula has a minus instead of a plus for a number, what it's telling you is to change that sign. It's saying this is actually negative h, but we want to use positive h. Or this is actually negative k, but we want to use positive k. So a minus in a formula is a way to tell you to change the sign. Use the opposite sign of whatever number that has. So for example, let's say I told you our formula for a circle, our equation for a circle is x minus 3 squared plus y plus 7 squared equals 25. If I wanted to find the center of that circle, I'm going to look at these two numbers right here. I'm going to look at the minus 3 and the plus 7. Now those two numbers in order give me the center of the circle, but I have to change the sign on both of them. Because remember, the formula is x minus h and y minus k, so it's telling you you're looking at the opposite of what we actually want. So the center of this circle would be positive 3, negative 7. The exact two numbers you see that I circled in yellow, but you change the sign on both of them. Now the radius would be 5, and the reason for that is, remember, this right here is r squared in the formula. So if you have r squared equals 25 and you want to find r, you do the same thing we did with the Pythagorean theorem. You take the square root. So the radius is going to be the square root of whatever that number is on the other side of the equal sign. In this case, it would be the square root of 25 or just 5. Now, one last note before we do a couple examples. If you have the x squared or the y squared by itself, no parentheses, no x plus 3, no y minus 7. So you just have x squared or y squared or possibly both. Then that means the h or the k, depending on whether it's x or y or both, would actually just be the number 0. It's basically saying, like, if I have x squared, that's the same as saying x plus 0 squared, and then h would be 0. Or if I have y squared, well, that's like having y plus 0 squared, so then k would be 0. So we're saying if you have the x or the y by itself and you're not adding anything to it, then the h or the k would be 0. So if I gave you an equation of a circle and it was x squared plus y squared equals some number, r squared, then it's a circle where the center is what we call the origin, or the point 0, 0. It's the middle of the coordinate plane. Okay, so for our example, let's draw a picture of this circle right here. X squared plus y minus 4 squared equals 9. So let's do it, first of all, let's do what we talked about earlier. Let's label the center. The center is a point something comma something. Now this is what I was talking about on the last slide. If I have the x squared by itself with no plus or minus number, any number after it, then h is 0. And I put a 0 right here. Now for the k, I'm going to do what I did on the first example. I'm going to look at the number that does come after the y, and I'm going to change the sign on it. So the center in this case would be 0, positive 4. 0 because there is no number after the x. Positive 4 because I changed the number on the sign changed the sign on the number after y. So the center is 0, 4. As for the radius, I can find the radius by, this is r squared, so I can find the radius by taking the square root of that number. The radius is the square root of 9, which would be 3. Now with just those two pieces of information, knowing the center and the radius, I can sketch this circle. Let me draw a blank coordinate plane here. All right, let's plot the center first. The center is the point 0, 4. 0 is the x, so we don't go left or right at all. 4, positive 4 means up 4, so it's going to be over nothing, up 4. I'm going to put a point right here. There's the center. Now the radius of this circle is 3. That means from the center, we're going to count 3 points in every direction to make the circle. So the best way to do that, the easiest directions to count points, are the 4 main directions, up, down, left, and right. So from the center of the circle, the radius is 3, so I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3 and mark a point. I'm going to count right 1, 2, 3 and mark a point. Count down 1, 2, 3 and mark a point. And then count left 1, 2, 3 and mark a point. So now, not the center, we'll leave that one, but through the 4 points we just drew, draw a circle going through those 4 points. And that's going to be the answer to our question. That's our sketch. That's a circle where the center is 0, 4, and the radius is 3. The blue circle there. And for our next example, let's flip the question backwards. Let me give you some information about a circle and see if we can come up with the equation for it. So what I have is a circle with a center at 5, -2. So remember, I gave you the center. That means this one is h and this one is k. I just have to change the signs on them. So in fact, let's start the equation this way. I'm going to copy down my generic equation for a circle. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Now, I just gave you h and k, but just like before, we have to change the sign on both of them. So since h is positive 5, I'm going to start this with x minus 5 squared plus, and then since k is -2, this would be y plus 2 squared. So same rule as before, whether you're working the question forwards or backwards, if you know the vertex always has the opposite sign of h and k in the formula. So all I need to know now is if I know the radius of the circle and I square it, that's the number that goes on the right there, and I'm done with the question. So I have to figure out the radius of this circle. Now, to do that, let me draw a quick sketch of what we're looking at here. What I'm looking at, and this will just be a quick, very quick sketch. I have the center at positive 5, -2. Let's say that's over 5 and down 2, right here. I'm going to approximate. Now, 1 point on the circle is 1, -1, right here. So the circle probably looks something like this. Has to go through that point and has to go around the center. But here's the important part. The radius of the circle connects those 2 points. So the 2 points that I gave you, 1, -1 and 5, -2, if I can find out how far apart they are, that's the radius of the circle. So what I want to do is I want to do distance formula. Remember something we learned earlier this year. We said if you have 2 points the distance between them is the square root of x2 minus x1, x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. And just another reminder, this is the way math works. You don't get to learn something and say, okay, I passed that quiz, we're done with it, let's forget it. You always keep using the things we've learned earlier in the year. So let's do this. Let's make the center be, it doesn't matter which one is which actually, but I'm going to make the center be x1, y1. And I'm going to make this point over here be x2, y2. And let's plug in all the numbers. So we have, looks like I can do better than that. We have square root of, it would be 1 minus 5 squared plus negative 1 minus negative 2 squared. So I have, and remember you can use a calculator for this part, that's fine. You end up with negative 4 squared plus, let's see, that would be negative 1 plus 2, that's going to be 1 squared. So you have 16 plus 1, which is the square root of 17. So if I'm just doing distance formula, and again, this is not a question that's new from today, this is something we did earlier in the year. The distance between the center of the circle, 5, negative 2, and the point on the circle, 1, negative 1, is the square root of 17. Now remember, when you find the distance, you're actually finding the radius. To finish the question, what I want is r squared. Well, if r is the square root of 17, and I square both sides of the equation, then r squared just equals regular 17. Because remember, a square and a square root cancel each other out, they're inverses. If I have a square root of a number, and I square it, I just get that number. So I put the 17 right here, and that is the answer to the question. So when you're working with equations of circles, it's always about the center and the radius. Sometimes it's very simple, like I just told you the center was 5, negative 2, so you just change the signs, you got h and k. Sometimes it's harder. We need to do some work to find the radius. I didn't tell you the radius was the square root of 17. We had to realize I've given you 2 points where if I find the distance between them, I will have the radius. And we had to use distance formula to find that distance. But once you have those 2 numbers, if you have h, k, and r, and you know where to put them in the right place, it's easy to write equations of circles.